After months of dilly-dallying, the government finally announced its decision to implement the FDI in retail policy, allowing 51% FDI in multi-brand retail, despite several protests by the allies and even threats of withdrawal from the coalition government. Well, the government, at least for now, is sticking with its decision, paving the way for retail giants such as Walmart, Carrefour and Tesco to enter the highly lucrative Indian market. But all is not hunky-dory, apart from the government facing political pressures. Making FDI in retail a policy is only the first of many steps. And to get a sense of how this will impact the retail landscape in India in the short, medium and long term, if at all, given the riders this policy comes with, I'd like to open this debate to my elite panel. I'm joined by Future Group Chief Kishore Biani, Thomas Verghese, the Chairman, CII National Committee Marketing, Biju Kurian, Chairman, FICCI Retail Committee, and last but not the least, B.S. Nagesh, the founder of the Trust for Retailers and Retail Associates of India. Thank you so much for joining me, gentlemen. So I'm going to kick-start this debate with you, Mr. Biani. What are the immediate implications with FDI in retail now becoming a policy? Does it mean international retailers will now flock to India?
I think we'll see an interesting play in terms of, I believe e-commerce business opens up significantly. So we'll see a flurry of activities happening on the e-commerce space. We see a specific category retailers like home, which IKEA is into, coming up into India, and I think that category emerges significantly interesting. It makes the markets very interesting. We'll also see a lot of people interested in convenience store as a format, in supermarket and hypermarket as a format. We'll see some flurry of activities there also. We can see some activities on the departmental store space in wherein some Asian retailers showing interest in the country in some specific regions. So there are many opportunities which will open up. Which will come first, who will lap in the first thing, I think time will only tell us.
Sure. Biju, if I can get you in, what's your sense of the larger implications?
There are two time frames that we need to look at. I think on the first hand, the granularity of the policy will need to certainly be spelt out. And I think that will take at least a month before the government clearly articulates what the details, what the fine print in the policy is. Post that, I think there are, certainly at this point of time, people are clear which states are likely to implement and which states are not likely to implement, and because of which when you want to come into the country, it will depend on what kind of brand you are and which are the states that you'd like to be present in. And depending on all of this, I think while there would be initial interest in the next 3 months, my sense is it will take at least about 6 months to a year before you see the first of the international retailers in this market.
Right, so we have a very optimistic view from Kishore Biani and a somewhat, balanced view, more pessimistic from Biju Kurian. Thomas, let's hear you out.
I don't think you're going to see any very significant changes in the short term. You have 4 of the world's largest retailers. They're already in the country, which is Walmart, Carrefour, Tesco and Metro. So they're already in the country. They've been operating in different cases for different number of years, some in like Metro for many years. So I think you're not going to see any major upheaval in multi-brand retail. However, a lot of international retailers, particularly from Southeast Asia, from Japan, some from Europe, are still interested in coming into the country. So, like for instance, Auchan has made an announcement recently about a partnership with the Landmark Group of Dubai, which was earlier these Spar stores, now the Max stores, and hopefully will become the Auchan stores going forward.
Sure. So clearly Thomas and Biju on the same page, saying that there's not going to be dramatic differences in the immediate future. Biju, if I can bring you in, what safeguards has the government put in place to ensure that there is no reversal of the policy if, let's say, the government changes, which is a possibility?
I don't think they put any safeguards into this policy, but I think the general safeguard that they're going with is the fact that reversal of reforms in any country certainly spells danger in terms of creating uncertainty in the minds of investors, and whichever government comes in will think very carefully about reversing any economic policies which have attracted investors into this country and made them invest here and then going back and telling them, sorry, that your investment is not possible any longer. Now, unless there is, let's say, an act of law, there is no reason for any international investor to worry about having made an investment under this current policy. We've had some reversals in the case of the telecom industry, but that I think clearly was because of an act of law, questioning certain decisions which were taken. This has largely been an executive decision, which is it's a policy decision, and by and large, I don't see that problem coming up.
Thomas, are you as confident as Biju on the fact that, this is not very likely?
Well, I don't think the detailed notification is out as yet, but it's a very good question, and a question which will be there obviously uppermost in the minds of all investors who come in, that how fickle are these investments going to be? What happens if there's a change of government and the new government doesn't want to promote FDI and multi-brand retail? So I'm sure the government has thought through such exigencies. We are not sure as yet what form they're going to take. But in terms of other safeguards, let me go one by one on the other safeguards. You see, the government is trying to promote the investment of the retail backend through the FDI policy announcement. So 50% of the investment of a minimum of $100 million, which has to come in within 3 years of the investment having been announced and implemented, will have to go into backend. And backend really constitutes everything. It constitutes manufacturing, processing, distribution, warehousing, supply chain, design, logistics. So it covers a slew of activities which will be covered under backend. The second safeguard is, I think, like we've not seen the detailed representation as yet, but the 1 million city caveat still holds, which means you're trying to protect the unorganized trade in all the smaller cities, the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities, and therefore the condition that modern retail and FDI and multi-brand retail will only be allowed in cities with 1 million, which is 10 lakh population and more, probably stands. However, there is a good question here as to what happens in states which have agreed to investments in FDI but do not have cities with 1 million. As things stand today, as per the latest 2010-11 census, 51 states actually get covered in this category. But when you chop it down to only the 9 states, right, and the 3 union territories which have agreed to welcome FDI and multi-brand retail, the number of cities really drastically comes down. It comes down at the latest count to only 15, and the effective population being addressed is some 65 million or 70 million people. So I think the playing field has narrowed down considerably.
I want to talk about a very pertinent point that Thomas brought up, Biju, if I can get you in. In terms of investment, half of the total investment, which is a minimum of $100 million, is supposed to be invested in the back-end infrastructure. How do you view that, considering only 9 states and 3 union territories are currently FDI friendly?
Well, I think it's going to be a big challenge in terms of investing making half of the investment in the back end. 2 reasons. One is that even let's say you go with what the government has thought of in terms of making investments in, let's say, the agri supply chain and in all of the other areas that they defined as part of backend. The challenge is that you can't do that in states where you can't actually source directly from the farmers. So all of whatever you wanted to make as an investment, so whether it's a collection center, whether it's a processing center, whether it's cold chain, whether it's a cold storage, none of that is possible if you can't actually access directly from the farmers. So that is one part of the challenge. Look at those retailers who are not within the grocery sector. So let's say, for example, look at an apparel retailer, look at a electronics retailer, and it would be hard, they would be hard pressed to be able to make, let's say, $50 million investment in the back end, because there isn't enough scope to make $50 million investment in the back end for many specialty retailers. That scope largely remains with food retail. So I guess, depending on the kind of retailer, there would certainly be some challenges in terms of how much you can invest And the second thing is also the time frame within which you can invest, and thirdly the states where you can invest.
Kishore Biyani, if I can bring you in, your comments on the fact that you're an Indian retailer and the fact that 50% of this will have to be made at the back end, and we don't even know which cities in the future will be agreeable for FDI in retail.
We'll have to see what states are unhappy even with electronic retail or home retail or fashion retail, or they are only unhappy with food retail. I think that's something which we'll wait and watch. I believe personally that states should not have any objections on other formats of retail rather than having objection on food or the supermarket or the grocery side of business. So we'll see some changes in that. Also, we believe the opportunity in 9 states also, we are like a big European Union, and 9 states also can be significantly large if somebody wants to build a strategy around it. And once a particular state gets investment, I think the neighboring states also would like that investment to come in. Nobody wants to be deprived. Ultimately, consumers will decide, and consumers normally have become quite demanding, and they want the best of products, the best of variety and great prices.
Right. Nagesh, if I can bring you in, can you talk about the investment that is supposed to go into the back-end infrastructure, and how will this be viewed largely?
Multi-brand retail, where you're talking of $100 million investment. So even if you take a 50 million at the back end, even if you take it at the rate of 50 rupees or 55 rupees, you're talking of 250 crores, not a small amount. Now this 250 crores will actually percolate into the ecosystem of investments. So whether you're putting a back-end infrastructure in terms of distribution center, the jobs created, for distribution center you require racking and shelving, SMEs will come in, you require transporters and truckers, again SMEs will come in. I mean, to me there's a huge opportunity of that investment. I think that rider is a very good rider. Over a period of time you will see percolation of that. And then the next 100 million that one will put in will actually probably go into the front end. So I really appreciate this rider, and I think serious players would look at it.
Biju, if I can bring you in.
Let's assume that the state has agreed to allow foreign investment in retail. Now, what is the quirky factor here is that you need to necessarily invest 50% of the total investment in the back end. Now, if a state has not adopted the Model APMC Act or has adopted the APMC Act with some limitations and says that no, for example, you can't actually access the farmer, you can't source directly from the farmer, and you can only buy from, say, the mandi, then what happens is that you can't actually make that kind of an investment in the back end. And if you don't invest in the back end, then the qualifying factor of 50%, luckily they've given you a 3-year time window wherein you can actually invest a 50%, but that becomes again a limiting factor. So there are lots of challenges, and I think what the government has done is only created an enablement, but in terms of implementation, I think the work is a lot ahead in that.
Now that it's a policy, and the challenges for retailers going ahead. So Biju, what are the challenges and bottlenecks you currently see in terms of actual implementation?
You need to bring in 100 million minimum investment. 50% of that investment in a 3-year time period has to be invested in the back end, and there's been a whole series of areas where they've defined as a back end. You can go up to a maximum of 51%. So what it does mean is that if you want to really look at a retail entry into this country, a foreign investor has to bring in 100 million, 51%. A domestic investor will have to bring in an equivalent 100 million, which is 49%, which is pretty close to 100 million. So which means that it's going to be a 200 million enterprise. 50% has to be invested of the foreign investment has to be invested in the back end, which is at today's rate approximately 250 crores. The third part of it is that the initial investments initial retail investments can only be made in those towns which have greater than 1 million population. So any state which is, let's say for example, agreed to this, you have to go there and find out which are the towns which are greater than 1 million population, and then make your investments there. So when you look at it, what you need is a foreign retailer coming into this country has to find a domestic partner who's willing to today invest approximately about 550 crores to start with. And then secondly, wait and go state by state in order to make the retail investment. So when you start to look at it from that perspective, then you realize that, it's not so easy. I mean, you have to find first a domestic player who's going to be bringing in 550 crores, and secondly then wait weight in terms of investing in each state. So it's not easy, but I think it's at least started the path forward in terms of opening up the sector to foreign players.
Nagesh, are you in agreement with Biju, and what do you see as some of the biggest challenges in terms of on-ground implementation?
Well, I think the first challenge and the bottleneck that I see is how are companies going to structure this. You know, the structuring, because it is one country, one nation, one central law, one registrar of companies at a national level. How would they structure the organizations? I mean, in China, they started off by having multiple JVs, multiple SPVs, then they consolidated, then brought everything together. So I think there are challenges which are going to be in terms of the formation of this joint ventures, formation of the organizations to be able to get the FDI in. I think that's one challenge that you would have. The second challenge that you would have is, I mean, in your whole supply chain matrix, in your whole supply chain plan that you make for a nation, you'll have pockets in between who are not complying or who are not welcoming FDI. So you may want to look at that very differently.
What time frame do you see these macro changes happen by?
To me, people who have already come in, I mean, who have been with their partners for the last 15 months to 3 years, would start looking at it within the 12 months. We'll see the first impact to the consumer, to the nation, to the tax, to the benefit in about 12 to 18 months' time. People who have not come in are likely to come in the next 12 to 18 months' time. And some of them may want to wait up to 2014 to say what's going to happen in the election and come after 2014. So I would say there are three kinds of companies who will look at this opportunity and enter India.
Right. I want to focus on which categories will really take off first. And Thomas, if you can go first on this one, which categories do you see taking off?
I see the food and grocery area taking off in a big way, which is where most of the international giants are really keen on. However, I see a very large traction in the area of apparel. I think that's going to take off in a big way. I think electronics is going to take off in a big way. And you've seen in India over the last many years a slew of local regional players. Now you're going to see maybe some big international players coming into this domain. So I think you're going to see across many categories, quick service restaurants, which anyway are really not affected. They were earlier also allowed to bring in their franchise, but these are in a way related to shopping, and they're related to the existence of good multi-brand retail outlets. I think they're going to be facilitated in their growth with bigger shopping centers coming up with much better modern trade. It's also going to fuel growth for these people in the coming years.
Sure. Biju, any closing comments and possibly a message for the government?
I think, you know, the FDI is the single executive action that the government has taken in terms of enabling flow of funds. There are several, other laws which prevent you from running a vibrant retail business. I mean, they could range from things like, the delay in the adoption of GST, the labor laws which currently are prevalent in various states, which don't allow many stores to operate on a 24/7 basis. There are constraints in terms of employing women beyond 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the evening in a retail store. There are things relating to the Essential Commodities Act which limit the quantum of produce, let's say, which kind of specify the limits in terms of how much of oil can you keep in your store, how much of cereals can you keep in your store, etc. So there are those issues which are there. So there are several of those kinds of issues which I think also need to get addressed in order to create a vibrant retail industry. As of now, it's one executive action which has enabled flow of funds, but that doesn't mean that there are, that there are no execution challenges. And I'm sure when you look at it at the local level, all of these will become executional constraints which need to also get addressed over time. And I'm sure as you start on this journey, you will find state governments getting a lot more progressive and wanting to actually attract investment and make the change as far as their consumers are concerned. And a lot of them will actually start repealing some of these age-old acts and replace them with more friendly and contemporary acts.
Absolutely, very pertinent points coming up there. And Nagesh, over to you for your closing comments.
As somebody who's been party to the retail industry in the last 20 years, I've always said that it is capital intensive, it requires money, whether domestic or international. We have seen a lot of large houses in the country from the domestic sector who are putting their money because they believe in this. I believe that opening up of international retail stores, opening up of FDI will upgrade systems, will upgrade supply chain, will upgrade the people and their ability and their skill, and we are actually going to first see the benefits for the consumer, second see for the supply chain, and finally I see that the tax impact, the sales tax collected, the GST collected, the VAT collected all throughout will help the country actually garner much more taxes and therefore reduce the fiscal deficit.
Right. And finally, Kishore Biani, if we can bring you in, and your closing words for FDI and retail now becoming a policy.
I think very difficult to predict, but we believe that once a consumer, let's suppose we are all, we move around, we have cousins living somewhere in Gujarat and we have some product available in Maharashtra and Gujarat not having them. Why should a consumer be deprived in some other state? We'll see a lot of changes which will come about as things goes by, because the overall, if the benefit of modern retail is win-win-win for everyone, there is no reason why states can't get convinced tomorrow.